Um, we don't have a huge amount of time. What I thought I would do first of all would be to introduce a traditional Tibetan Buddhist view of mindfulness, and then we can start to relate that to different psychotherapy theories and then think about how it might be taken into practice. Some of you might be familiar with the work of John Norcross, who was one of the early theoreticians of integrative psychotherapy. And he made a very helpful distinction between theoretical integration and technical eclecticism. He said that each system of therapy comes up with useful tricks of the trade and ways of doing things. And you can make use of these, but you have to clearly understand that these are techniques. Very often the underlying belief systems are non-integratable because they are grounded in basic assumptions. For example, traditional transactional analysis doesn't have a strong notion of the unconscious, although Eric Berne himself trained originally as a psychoanalyst. So if you wanted to integrate Freud and TA as theory, it doesn't make much sense, because scripts and drivers are very different from unconscious drive theory. So when we come to think about mindfulness as it's been developed through John Kabat-Zinn and integrated as a CBT package, which is taken up by various groups and applied in different directions, this is a technique. And many people then try to apply the technique into models where actually there's a disharmony in assumption. So one of the reasons for looking at the historical Buddhist origins is to try to see what is the basic view or orientation or paradigm out of which these practices arose, so that one can think more clearly, can you have a harmony between the belief and the practice of the traditional meditation practice, and how does that square with the way in which you go about sitting in the room with your clients? Because if there's a disharmony between the two, sooner or later it becomes difficult. It's the same like in Gestalt. Generally speaking, Gestalt's quite open, welcoming way of working. You're working towards the contact boundary, and therefore there's a lot of sensitivity and empathic attunement. However, if you're going to request the client to engage in an experiment, you have to tell them very clearly in advance exactly what you're going to do, how long you're going to do it, what the likely risks are, and then you go into a more kind of field marshal view, and you direct them in the exercise because you've taken on that authority, and then afterwards you review what you did and you get back more into a kind of flow of the relationship. So these kind of shifts are possible to integrate if you're very clear about what you do. But we have to recognize that if we're giving someone an instruction, we are greatly altering the power relationship. So if you're working, say for example, in a Rogerian way, and then you decide to give someone homework, we have to think, well, what sort of a voice is it that says, I know what's good for you. If you do this, you will get some benefit. How do we know that? So these little micro moves are very important, I think, to keep an eye on. So that, because of course one of the things the patient or the client is doing is introjecting or internalizing the felt sense of how we go about doing our business. So if we're all of a piece, if we're integrated, then they're getting something that has a stream and a flow, and hopefully modeling that or coming into alliance with that will help them to integrate. But if we're demonstrating a fairly bumpy ride with a bit of this and a bit of that, that's likely to feed into the sort of fragmentation that we would normally call a neurosis. So that's just a sort of general background. In the Nyingma Tibetan tradition that I've been involved in for quite a while, generally think of four aspects: the view, the meditation, the activity, and the result. So the view is how you take up a reading of the world and your place in it. And then the meditation fits with that to try to bring it alive. And then you have a consequent activity when you're not sitting in meditation anymore, you're out and about with people. It's like, how do you carry on the quality of that? And that feeds into a particular kind of result. So, for example, one view would be this world's a fairly scary place. We're born into it, we haven't much of a clue what's going on. We have all our different ideas, but actually big bad things happen and we don't have much of a basis for stability. Inside that, we might think, according to the tradition, our own actions have consequences. This movement of cause and effect, commonly known as karma, means that whatever I do is going to come back to me in some way. We can't avoid the consequence of the actions of what we do. Therefore, I have to be more conscious and more responsible because it's resting on my shoulders. My future is determined primarily by my actions. It's not directed by the behavior of others. And clearly, that's very different from most modern psychotherapy. Although, if you read Klein, she's suggesting that the infant, probably even the fetus in the womb, is moving within an ocean of symbolic identification. So the newborn baby sucking on the mother's breast imagines in her constellation that through the breast is coming not just milk, but feces, penises, and breasts. And because these contents of the mother's body are coming into the baby starts to develop this paranoia that it's going to be punished for this theft. A bit like Prometheus' notion of stealing fire from the gods and then going to be punished. That somehow it's going to cost you. There's no such thing as a free lunch, not even if you're 1 week old. So inside that notion, that the baby has something innate in it. But most modern theories are thinking it's interpersonally developed and that the brain is developing in a communication with the environment. So if you are fortunate enough to grow up in a benign environment, you start to have the gradual integration of brainstem activity, amygdala, and then the frontal lobes, so that if you have secure attachment, according to the nature of the situation, you will have the activation of the appropriate part of your brain. But if you've had very difficult circumstances when you were young, you're probably going to have more intensity of brainstem activity, sort of primitive fight-flight. You're probably going to have a lot of muscular tension as well and very poor breathing, and that's going to activate a low-level adrenaline buzz running through you all the time, so the cortisol is going to be running, and that hyper-aroused state will be normalized, which is why, of course, people who've been unfortunate to have that situation, when they do have a triggering external situation, find the period of coming down from it much longer than someone, say, with what we call a secure attachment, and that makes them extremely vulnerable. You might start to see how a kind of meditation could be useful in that, giving the person a way of grounding themselves again. So, in terms of mindfulness practice, the view is that distraction is dangerous. If you don't keep your eye on the ball, not only will you lose phenomenological attention, that is to say, the optimal amount of connection through your senses with the environment will be diminished. So you will be making sense of what's going on with a very limited access to what is actually there. Does that make sense? Not only that, because you're not in touch with what's out there, you've got an over-reliance with what's in your head. So your historically developed maps are going to be overprivileged. And that mental world is one which leads to a lot of problems. I mean, it's the basis of a neurosis, isn't it? So being depressed, being anxious, means actually not being in the world. There is ongoing sensory deprivation if you're in your thoughts too much, because you're just not attending to what is there. And that distraction from the outer field of experience is usually also connected with distraction from the capacity to analyze the internal maps that you have. That is to say, one of the functions we have in therapy is to help people to see how these maps have been developed through time. Very often when people come to see us for the first time, they believe that their childhood's long ago. What's that got to do with my life now? I just want to get on with it. I keep getting in a mess. I don't know why. Can you help sort me out? And we're trying to say it's not innate, but neither is it just some kind of little hat that's been plonked on top of you. It is as if you are exactly these patterns, and it is as if that, because of your own habit of identification, and what we can do in the therapy is to help you to disidentify, to see these movements in progress, and through that to have more clarity as an observer, which gives a sense of freedom because you're no longer in confluence with what's occurring, and at the same time to have a clearer sense of the particular shaping of your own habits and procedures, which also helps you to normalize them, because you start to be able to see, oh, other people have what I have. You know, for some people getting a diagnosis is very helpful, because instead of thinking, you know, I'm crap, my life's always been crap, I'm useless, which is extremely self-referential and redolent in affect, you start to think, I'm anxious and depressed. Oh, I haven't invented these words. Go and Google it a bit, as people tend to do now, and you find out, oh, this is very common. 30 to 40% of the population of Britain are going to experience these things in the course of their life. It's normal, though unpleasant, to have these experiences. And that then allows a degree of management of the situation, because it's no longer some personal moral failing, but rather a set of habitual responses which I've become party to, but are essentially understandable patterns of relating, just as we can understand why people smoke cigarettes. Usually when people start as teenagers, they're a bit socially anxious, their friends are doing it and so on. It's a way of joining in. You read on the packet that it's killing you, but the psychological function it started to take on, plus the biochemical adaptation, normalizes it in an unhealthy way. So as long as you're thinking, I'm a smoker, that's what I do, that fusional identification makes it very difficult to change. If you start to think smoking is something I do, then you've got a bit of separation. Smoking is something I do and it harms me. The notion it harms me is now starting to be used by yourself to push the thing away. I don't want to do this anymore. Whereas if you think I'm a smoker and it's harming me, it sort of sticks the dagger further into you. Does that seem to anyone with you? So we want to have this separation in order to provide both a cognitive and an emotional clarity about what's going on. So space is very important. And in the Buddhist tradition, something very similar is going on. The basic ideas that would be taken up for this level of analysis would be, firstly, impermanence. Starting to look around the world, to listen to the sounds that are going on, to have feeling and sensation, and to recognize that that's always moving. There is no continuity. We're sitting here, cars and trucks and so on are going by, and the sound is coming and going. You can't grasp that sound. We're sitting, you might suddenly move your body, you might scratch yourself, the sensation's there, and then it's gone. We live in a field of movement, and yet we learn to make sense of the field of movement through objectification and reification. We turn the world into things. So a couple of us just went for a walk along there to look at the ducks, and then some little babies in their prams being plonked next to the ducks as if that's a marvellous thing to do. And you know, the mum's likely to be saying, that's a duck. Well, that's what we call a duck. The idea that there is a duckness to the duck that the duck is internally defined as a duck is what is given to children all the time. And they are empowered to have a sense that they can read the world. They know what's what. So naming goes with power, but it's the way the naming is done. If you name something and through that create the notion that this particular object has a continuity as itself through time, that it is always what I say it is now. It was like this in the past, it will be like this in the future. You can see that there's a sort of stabilization of our world. Oh, I'm able to predict what's going on. This is in particular one of the qualities of secure attachment. People who've got anxious, insecure attachment and so on have much more difficulty in making predictions which can be to some degree meshed with the dynamic changing nature of the world, because they're clinging on to something which can't be modified. But even though we modify our sense of what something is, the noun, if you like, the thingness of what's there is modified or qualified through adjectives and adverbs. For example, across the road there's been a little restaurant, and I was looking at, they've got nice engraving on the window saying that they used to serve different kinds of wines and food and so on, and now it's pretty empty, pretty desolate. So presumably someone had a dream, a vision, they got some money from the bank, or they got inherited some money, tried to set up this wine bar, it's going to be great, they did the decor. Whew, big dream. And now it's gone, but the name is still there because it's etched in the glass. And we say, oh, that used to be ... It was ... In that way of talking, it's as if there's still something there. There's the echo or the shell of something. But even when the restaurant was there, presumably different people went into it every day. Not the same people with their own same regular chair. So, and the staff would have been changing because they might have had a lunch shift and an evening shift. So, in entering the restaurant, oh, it's nice to be back here. Oh, they do this chicken dish or whatever really nicely here. You don't know. The chef could be changed. Could be the chef's day off. Some poor little 16-year-old's got a frying pan in the back. We don't know. It looks the same on the menu, but as you know, if you go back to a restaurant, often it's very different. So there we see our desire for a solid, enduring substance, because it helps us to feel powerful. We know what's what. But the actuality is, this is a moving world. This is a changing world. And so, in fact, we could say we live in two different worlds. There is the phenomenological world, the world of lived actual experience, changing moment by moment. And we have the conceptual world, generated out of abstractions about our experience, especially experience in the past, and very often also not even our own direct experience, but things we learned at school, things our parents said to us, things you see on the telly or on the computer. We mop in all this information, we inform ourselves, we give ourselves these shapes inside, and then imagine that that gives us access to things as they are. But actually, what we get is what is revealed in this moment. So, we get a little bit of sunshine is breaking through the clouds, and then get some light shining on the wall. So if you're the same as me, but as soon as a wee bit more light arrives, I feel happier. I'm over 60 years of age, but a little bit of light shining on the wall can make me happy. It's like that, isn't it? You'd think, oh, where's this person's secure sense of self? But something as light as that, or hearing a blackbird singing in the morning, and suddenly the heart opens and lifts. We are very, very responsive. We are part of the world. So not only are all the phenomena that we experience impermanent, but we, the experiencer, are actually impermanent. That we are probably much more reactive than we would like to imagine we are. the sense of agency of the ego self is predicated on the notion, I am proactive, I'm living my life, I'm making things happen. But a lot of the time we're simply caught up in an integrated movement of cause and effect. You can slice it down in the middle and say object and subject, and that they interact as if there are two different things there. But when the light shines on the wall and I feel a bit happier, I'm not deciding to be happy. I find myself being happy as a consequence of something which is happening to me. So my conclusion is arriving after the fact of the immediacy of the experience. So a moving world and a moving personhood, a moving subjectivity. What can I rely on? This can feel a bit ungrounded. If the sense of self is based on a consciousness that wants to know what's what, that's privileging knowledge about situations, that consciousness is going to be put into question a great deal of the time. That is to say, the richness of our lived experience is such that there are so many variables operating in it, we cannot accurately predict what is going on. However, what we can do is we can predict patterns. So we can probably all agree today is Friday. It's useful to know that. This is Friday. What is Friday? Friday's not anything at all. You could say it's the end of the week. Well, what is the week? So Friday is a concept niched inside the notion of a week. Knowing that Friday is towards the end of the week, the last working day before the weekend, gives us a sense of knowing something. But that's like a chess game. Chess has carved pieces that are moved around according to conventional rules. It's an entirely artificial thing to do to learn to play chess. Friday is completely artificial in that sense, because you cannot say on the basis of today's Friday what next week's Friday is going to be. That day will be whatever it is in its actuality, with the weather and who rings you on the phone, or what you forget when you go out shopping, or what kind of day the kids have had at school, or what your plans you might have for the weekend. That will be, in its immediacy, moment by moment, different from what you have today. So calling it Friday and saying, oh, thank God for Fridays, that's as if they were all the same, like saying thank God for bananas. That when you eat a banana, you get that particular banana. Same like with apples. Well, we know that russets taste different from Cox's pippins. But you bite into a russet, it's a bit dry, this one. It's not a real russet. It says russet, looks like a russet. I know what a real russet tastes like. Same as having a bad cup of coffee. It is coffee, but it's not the coffee that I like to have. So in that way we can see that there's a very subtle but ceaseless ongoing conversation between what is actually appearing, what's actually directly experienced, and the ways in which we make sense of it. When we have mental health problems, if you like, I think generally we can say the consequence of that, or perhaps that these are a consequence of slipping away from the widest possible interface with the world. At the far extreme, you've got psychotic disorders, in which there could be a very great cut-off, a sort of schizophrenic schizophrenia, where somebody is absolutely not connecting very much at all through the senses, with states of anxiety, depression, preoccupation, OCD and so on. These are conditions in which a person is caught up in a conceptual world. They're worrying about something. I couldn't get to sleep last night. I kept thinking about, it's night time, put on some music. Oh, I can't listen to music. I just got to sort this out. I've got to sort it out. That person is not in the world. Well, they're in their own private world. They're in a labyrinth of their own thoughts, a tortuous sort of pseudo-reality. It looks as if it's got some substance to it. It looks as if the activity they're pursuing is meaningful. But to someone